Hey, what is up, everybody? It is Uncle Mad here for our Friday night live stream. Back home, back in the studio after being in the Dominican Republic for a week, where our last two live streams emanated from. It's a great vacation. If you haven't watched that series, go back and check those out. But it's good to be home. Do miss being on vacation, though. It's always good to be on vacation. But we're back into the saddle of things, get back into our usual rotation of videos and content and everything coming up. With vacation out of the way, with the Dominican Republic vacation out of the way, we've got kind of our standard new regular videos coming up. We'll have a couple Titans home games left to go this season. Some other general content to get us to the end of the year. And then the next big thing we're going to have coming up will be the Walt Disney World Marathon the first weekend in January. So that's the next big event we have coming up on the channel will be that one. And that'll probably be the video series that kind of wraps up this year of doing daily updates. Haven't really fully decided what the plan for 2024 is yet, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Richard in the chat jumping in right away says, have you recovered from your cool vacation yet? I don't know that you ever really recover from vacation, especially like one like that's more of a relaxing vacation. You could kind of be on that trip forever. You know, the Disney trips, the more chaotic stuff like going to London, stuff like that, where you're busy and go. Those do take a little bit of recovery, but relaxing beach vacation, you kind of are always like, I kind of wish I was still there. Kind of wish I was still going, but I'm pretty lucky. My job's a little bit laid back, a little bit easy this time of year. So it's one of the slower times of year for my job. So I'm able to kind of ease back in pretty smoothly to work this week and get back in the swing of things. I was telling Jesta when we got back, I was like, the timing of our vacation almost always works out really well because we basically go on vacation pretty much the first full week in November, usually come back, have about a week of work, which, like I said, usually this time of year, my work's a little on the slower side. So it's a little bit easier to come back in. And the next week we jump right into Thanksgiving, which I usually take almost the whole week off for Thanksgiving because my work's that slow. So it's basically like take a vacation, come back, work a week, take another week off. And I don't have to travel or anything like that for Thanksgiving because my whole family is local here to Nashville. So don't really have the rigmarole of holiday travel coming up. Just easy, laid back, staying home and relaxing for a week. So it works out pretty good in that regard. But we're back. We're getting back in the swing of things. So today, things I wanted to cover on the live stream, a thing I haven't been able to get to, haven't really got to talk about yet because of the travel I was on, was the end of Nashville SC's 2023 season. We'll wrap that up in a bow. I'll kind of share my final thoughts on the team, the squad, the coaching, just everything, and kind of look to what I hope to see as the team moves forward. So we'll get into that. I'm going to wrap up with that. That'll be kind of the end of the video because I've got probably a lot more thoughts on that than I do any of the other stuff I was going to cover today. Titans, season still rolling along for better or worse. We've got the Jacksonville Jaguars coming up on Sunday, a trip down there to Florida to take them on, which is weird. We go to Florida 2 weeks in a row. We played at Tampa Bay last week, at Jacksonville this week, so a little bit of weird scheduling quirk there for the Titans. Before we get into that, the other big thing this weekend coming up that's kind of like relevant to the stuff we cover on the channel is AEW All Out. Their pay-per-view event is tomorrow night. Not going to get into a full breakdown of it because honestly, the show doesn't really have my intrigue that much. I've said this probably the last few AEW pay-per-views. It's like they're kind of watering them down. They've increased the number. It looks like they're kind of going with the WWE model where they're going to have one a month now. And I think they're kind of watering it down, especially because, they're still, standard pay-per-view. It's like $50 a month, whereas like the AEW or the WWE premier live events that are now on Peacock, you just get that as part of your Peacock subscription. For years it was on WWE Network that was like $10 a month. So I think so far it's worked out, according to Tony Khan, for AEW to go kind of monthly with pay-per-views. The numbers have stayed strong for the sales, but I do kind of suspect they're going to hit a wall because they're slowly watering down each show more and more, to the point where it's like they're going to hit that wall where the people that are buying every single AEW pay-per-view aren't going to keep paying $50 a month for each AEW pay-per-view. They'll be a little bit more selective, whereas for the first, 3 years of the company, where there was 4 pay-per-views a year, you knew all 4 were going to deliver, all 4 were going to be a big show. So even if you weren't that interested, that invested in the matches, you kind of were like, well, I know something's going to happen. I know they're going to deliver because they do these 4 times a year and they're always a banger. Not going to be the same case if they keep going 12 a year. Like they're already really pushing heavily their next show, World's End, before they've even done this one. So you can kind of already see the seams kind of popping in that, and just the matches themselves like are really kind of feel like below pay-per-view standards. You've got Jay White versus MJF is the main event for the AEW World Title. Done a good angle. I mean, everybody involved is really talented, really good. I'm sure they'll have a great match, but it's just don't see any scenario where MJF drops the belt here because he's got about 5 other feuds that are set up and rolling right now. So that always hurts a main event. That always hurts a pay-per-view when like you've got a featured match, the biggest match on the show, and you just have no doubt who's going to win. It's kind of what's been hurting some of the recent WWE shows where you kind of know Roman Reigns isn't dropping the belt anytime soon, that they're going to wait until Mania or some other huge show to do the big moment of him finally losing. So that kind of takes a little bit of the steam out of the shows. Same thing right now with AEW and MJF. You kind of know it's not going to be Jay White as talented as he is. It's going to be somebody like Adam Cole when he comes back from injury, Wardlow if they're trying to rebuild him, Will Ospreay if the rumors are true that he's coming in and signing full-time with AEW would be a big choice to knock off MJF. But it just kind of takes some of the steam out of the pay-per-view. And then there's like a 6-man tag with Edge, Sting, and Darby Allin against Christian, Luchasaurus, and Nick Wayne. I mean, that feels like a TV match. That doesn't feel like a pay-per-view match. There's a 4-way match for the tag titles, which will be really good. That'll be really intriguing. But once again, it's not something that feels like it's worth $50. Jericho and Omega versus Young Bucks. That'll be an awesome match, really entertaining. But once again, short build, kind of short momentum. That's probably the match that would be the closest one to get me to buy the show. Is that one right there. But the rest, it is what it is. But we'll see what happens. I might go up to a buddy's house and watch it. If not, I don't know if I'll watch it because I don't know if I'm gonna feel like spending $50 on my own unless I'm like splitting it or like working out a group deal to watch it together with some people, because $50 for that show just feels way too expensive, and I can just find out the results later anyway and not really miss that much. One of the big things that he's trying to promote, and I think this is Tony Khan seeing the tea leaves that interest is down, is once again he's promoting the big Tony Khan announcement, signing a world-renowned star. Rumors about who that is going to be: Will Ospreay potentially, Mercedes Moné. I think back to when he overhyped the signing of Christian, and I think it's going to be something like that. It's going to be somebody he's a really big fan of that maybe isn't necessarily the biggest superstar, the biggest like huge groundbreaking name. I don't know. We'll see what happens with that one, but that's that. We'll see what happens with that. We'll move on to that. But I wanted to talk about Titans, Jaguars. And man, last year I thought was going to be take the cake for being the most frustrating Titan season, borderline ever. But this one might just have it. This one might just have it because, we had some really bad seasons kind of between the Fisher and Vrabel eras. Like the whole Munchak era was just a wet fart. The Ken Whisenhunt era was the worst. Just the worst teams we had, the worst performances we had, the worst records. But like last year and this year, where you kind of, wrong or right, I think myself and most Titans fans had talked ourselves into these last 2 years that the team was going to be decent, if not good, could be competitive, could be a team that could make some noise, especially because, the AFC South is not the strongest division in football. It's a division where if you can put together 10-9 wins, you can win the division, get to the playoffs. And we've just been terrible. Like we've been so bad. And then keeps being these glimmer of hope moments that like get you excited back up, like beating the Falcons with Will Levis in his first start. It was like, okay, we got Will Levis. We maybe have our quarterback of the future. We maybe got something to build on. And then fast forward to the Steelers game, the Bucks game, and it's the same, just damp squid crap, can't block. Offensive line is just Swiss cheese, getting Will Smith. Will Smith might be better putting Will Smith back there to take a few hits, but can't really run an efficient offense because we can't pass block for more than a second. Like I'm watching this Andre Dillard, and like one of the things I said in my season preview was, we know that Andre Dillard can't be a worse left tackle than Dennis Daly. I was wrong. He is the worst left tackle in NFL history. He is so freaking bad. I can't fathom how bad Andre Dillard is. And like, it's to the point where like with Dennis Daly, if you ask me to like pick some features and say like what's some good things about him, like he was a decent run blocker. He was strong. You could see why NFL teams would pick him, would like have interest in him, for whatever it was, why he just was just a statue when it came to pass blocking was the big issue. But I cannot see one redeeming quality in Andre Dillard. I have no idea how he made it to the NFL. I have no idea how we went out and gave him the second chance when we kind of washed out in Philadelphia, because like he can't pass block. He's slow. He's not strong. He can't run block. He literally can't do anything. The play that like summed up him in a nutshell, just how bad he is, was for whatever reason, Tampa Bay had their big, huge, massive nose tackle, big, huge, biggest guy in the field, Vita Vea, lined him up wide on Andre Dillard. And he managed to speed rush this big, like 700-pound guy, not really 700 pounds, but he's that big, speed rushed right by Andre Dillard. Biggest, fattest guy in the field, outran Andre Dillard around the corner, hit Will Levis. So it's ultimately still been the backbone of the problem of the team. I think you do have to lay a little blame on Tim Kelly, on Vrabel, because you know the offensive line is bad. And maybe you hope Dillard would work out. Maybe you hope some of the draft picks would have worked out better. So you kind of hope maybe you could patch something together. But the fact that they haven't been able to come up with any kind of, and it's easier said than done. It's not like this is just, if everybody could do this, then offensive line struggles wouldn't be an issue for anybody. But they haven't really figured out anything to do to kind of counteract how weak the offensive line is. Like there's no quick passing. There's no like screens to get the ball out of the quarterback's hand faster. There's nothing like the things you see. Like when I think back to, obviously you look up the road and this guy fortunately just got knocked out for the season, Joe Burrow, how badly he got beat up his first 2 years in the NFL. And they started to do things like quick bubble screens to Jamar Chase, quick throws to their running back Mixon out of the backfield, just trying to, because they knew the offensive line couldn't hold up. So they were trying to do other things to get the ball out quicker, not let the quarterback sit there like a sitting duck all the time. And we don't seem to be doing that. And also Will Levis hasn't really shown the mobility that he was supposed to have coming in to like maybe escape some of the pressure. But I've read some things where like the theory is because he's a rookie, he's still learning the game, that he's maybe trying to process what he's seeing more and not like wanting to immediately just pull the ball down and start running. But it all just mismatches into a terrible offense that can't do anything because can't protect long enough, haven't made the offensive adjustments necessary to help with the lack of protection. And it's just, if anything, the one offensive adjustment they've made is they've gone super conservative. Like we're going like draw plays on 3rd and long because we don't trust the line to hold up long enough for us to throw a pass. Punting in situations where in the past you would see Vrabel go for it on like a 4th down, kicking field goals in situations where in the past you would see Vrabel go for it on 4th down, because there's just so little faith in the offensive line to be able to do anything that they just don't feel like they can run an offense that's anything other than super borderline back to the Fisher days conservative Titans offense. Like, it's hard to watch. It's painful to watch. It's not fun to watch. But it is frustrating because there are little signs there. Will Levis has looked good in stretches. DeAndre Hopkins has been good. He's been a lot better than any of the other like veteran receivers we've tried to sign to make things work there. But there's other disappointments. There's other things we said that could have made this team better if Chig took a big step forward, if Treylon Burks took a big step forward. Neither one of those things have happened. So it's just, we're relying on, veteran DeAndre Hopkins to still do things. Nick Westbrook-Akine is still somehow like the guy getting the most targets of anybody on the team, which makes no sense. I mean, solid player, great player. Would love him if he was like our 4th or 5th option wide receiver, but somehow he stays 2 or 1B no matter what happens. It's just unbelievable. And the defense, I don't know if it's a motivation thing, so they see how bad the offense is. I don't know if it's like some of the injuries that we have on the defense side of the ball. I don't know if it's just like age, fatigue, wear and tear that's on some of these guys, but the defense has kind of bailed us out when the offense has struggled over the past few years, and we're not getting that this year. The defense, decent game against Tampa, held them down. But I shouldn't say held them down. If Mike Evans doesn't drop 5 passes in that game, that's a complete blowout. But defense did enough to give us a chance against Tampa, but they're not what they used to be. And so it's frustrating. But we kind of knew this year was going to be a patch it together and hope for the best type year. And then next year, when we've got all the cap space, when we kind of can really fully reset from the terrible roster construction John Robinson left us with, that next year was kind of the real year to look forward to. And so, if Will Levis continues to build on his potential, I'll take this over like one of those terrible like 2-14 full on blow it up rebuild seasons we've had in the past. So if we go 5-12, 6-11, even somewhere in that, I'll take that over just like a terrible lose every game, tank, blow up the team season, if it feels like we actually have the quarterback we need to move forward, because if he's going to work, then we've got the salary cap space. We've got the draft capital now from some of the trades we've made to really make a really good go of getting back to being a truly competitive team pretty quickly next year. If we can get the free agents we need, if we can get the draft picks right, you can see a path to this not being like a multi-year just disaster, horrible stretch like we had with like Wisenhunt in that period of time. So there's hope for the future, but I think we've kind of the last little bit of hope we had for this season probably got squeezed out with the Bucs game. And the thing that's most frustrating about it, probably, and this is why this season feels more frustrating than like some of the seasons where we've been just absolutely terrible, is there's such a clear path to where we could have been better because of other things that are going around. Like we're playing the Jaguars Sunday, comfortably in the lead in the AFC South right now, but just got smoked by the 49ers. Anytime they've played a good team, they haven't looked that good. So you can clearly see they're, you know, not the overhyped thing that people made them out to be. Some people were picking them to be the number one team in the AFC and maybe go to the Super Bowl. Clearly wrong there on that one. Trevor Lawrence still hasn't really got to the level people thought of him. And then you look down at Houston, what CJ Stroud's doing, and you're kind of like, ugh, this Jacksonville thing might be. I'd be almost more terrified of like right now of being a Jacksonville fan than I would be a Titans fan, because this is supposed to be their window where everybody else is supposed to be down in the AFC, but their franchise quarterback has been mediocre at best. CJ Stroud looks insane and ready to take the Texans to another level. Will Levis, like I said, what we've got to potentially build off of there, and we haven't really seen much of it, but Anthony Richardson looked pretty decent the little bit we got to see of him in Indianapolis. So, you know, Jacksonville looked like they're about to have a window to be the dominant team and be a top contender in the AFC, and it looks like it might be a smaller window than what was thought. But just looking around the AFC in general as well, though, I mean, see what happened to the Bengals. Now they, you know, have pretty much their season's probably over because they were already struggling. They're already kind of hovering around 500. Now with Joe Burrow out for the season, that's probably done. The Bills struggling this season, looking like they might be on the cusp of not making a playoff team. There's going to be some like really odd teams that you wouldn't have expected preseason that are going to make it into the playoffs this year. And it could have been the Titans. The Titans could have been one if there was just a few better things, a few more complete things to the team, but it just didn't happen. And the frustrating thing is like we're 3-6, and I think we're still only like 1.5, 2 games out of the playoffs. So if we could put a run together, it's still possible, but you just see what the performance we get on the field, especially with the offensive line and the issues there. And there's just no path to where that's an actual feasible, believable thing to think could happen. Vrabel even mentioned this week talking about the Jaguars. The Jaguars started last season 3-6 before they went on their little run that led to them winning the AFC South. Of course, we helped them out by losing whatever it was, 7 straight games to end the season last year. So yeah, it's a frustrating game. I mean, I think Titans will be competitive. It'll be very similar to the last couple of games with the Steelers and the Jaguars, where it'll feel like we're in it. It'll feel like we have a chance, but the offense probably just won't be able to do enough to actually get anything done. If I'm going to give a score prediction here, I would go 24-14 Jaguars. That would be probably my prediction there, because I feel like they'll do enough to get some points on the board. We'll be frustratingly inefficient on offense and scrape together just enough to make it a frustrating loss that you feel like if we'd done a few things differently, we could have won the game, but ultimately could not. All right, let's catch up on the chat a little bit real quick. Hunter Welcher says, at least last year we had the injuries to rationalize our performance. We just sucked this year. 100% true. Like last year when we had like whatever it was, like 90 players throughout the season that were on some form of, or I think it was we played 90 plus players because of injuries and stuff like that. And that was a huge issue last year. We've had injuries here and there. I mean, Burks not being able to stay on the field is a huge problem. But I mean, even when he's been healthy, hasn't looked anywhere near what we were hoping he was going to be. Sean Murphy Bunting being out the last couple of games has probably been a big deal. And, you know, I've never been a Tannehill hater. I've probably been a little bit kinder to him than most. So, you know, I think him being out, it's shown us what we might have in Will Levis. So it's been good in that regard. But I don't know. There's been injuries this season, but yeah, you're right. They're not nearly as significant as they have been the last couple of years. So definitely something we can't really blame in that regard. You know, third and long draws, he says, Jeff Fisher's wet dream. Yeah, I mean, but that used to be, you know, we as Titans fans probably give Jeff Fisher a little bit more grief for that than we probably should. Because, I mean, at that point in time, that was everybody in the NFL. Like, that was why that Rams team we played in the Super Bowl was such a mind-blowing team, was because they were just running offense that was like 10 years ahead of its time. You know, compared to what everybody else was doing back then. And I'll talk a little bit about Jeff Fisher because I'm seeing some very similar vibes with the Nashville SC fan base and Gary Smith to what we saw towards the end of the Jeff Fisher era in Tennessee. And so I'm going to have a little bit of Jeff Fisher commentary later when we get into Nashville SC. Richard Greenberg, very impressive with MJF on Twitter fighting against anti-Semitism. Yeah, like that whole deal. And then also just like some of the stuff he's been doing, because he basically turned babyface without ever actually turning. Like he was one of the best like pure heels wrestling scene in years. But that stuff and just the fans being into him, it's very similar. It reminds me kind of like, obviously the anti-Semitism is like a completely different issue and an awesome thing that he's doing. But like the way he's transitioned just naturally without really doing anything different in his presentation from a heel to a babyface is like very similar to The Rock back in the day. And, now he's going to be in movies too. He's got the Iron Claw movie coming out that he's a part of. So a lot of good things from MJF. He's been a guy who just across the board been very impressive across the year. Richard says NFL season is tough on the QB position. Yeah, it feels like it more than ever this year because, like we saw Tannehill's been out. Burrow just knocked out for the season last night. We've already had Daniel Jones get knocked out for the season. Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson's out for the season. Even Lamar Jackson, like he made it through the game, but there was definitely a few times in that game last night where he was getting beat up. He was getting knocked around. He was getting nicked up. Yeah. I don't know if it's just that because they're running more, because we're passing more, there's more opportunities for quarterbacks to get hit. But it's pretty crazy how beat up quarterbacks are getting this year. Like maybe it's just recency bias, but it feels like with how many like top level significant quarterbacks we have out injured with long-term injuries this season, it's, don't know that we've seen anything like that before. Every time I bet against the Titans, they always find a way for me to lose my bet. Yeah. One of the reasons I don't ever bet Titans games is they're so unpredictable that their only thing that's consistent about the Titans is they're inconsistent. Right when you think you've got them figured out, you're like, I would tell you right now, well, I don't know what their team total is right now, but I would bet whatever the under is on their team total. And I say that, and this will be the game that for the first time in like 3 years, they'll probably score 30 points somehow on Sunday. I don't know how, but that's just been their pattern. Is right when you think you've got them figured out, right, good or bad, as soon as you're like, they suck, they can't do anything, they're going to be terrible, then they put up 30 points and win a game out of nowhere. Or as soon as you're like, we're putting something together, Will Levis, 4 touchdowns against the Falcons. This could be the turning point. Go out, wet fart against the Steelers the next game. So it's one reason I don't bet them, because it's frustrating enough to be a fan and to cheer them on. But then to have money riding on their games, to have stakes beyond just, emotional stakes, just makes it 100 times worse. Like we went to London. I bet the Ravens, just like I was like, I don't know why. I just, for some reason, was like, I'm going to bet the Ravens in this game. So I never do. Even for against the Titans, I just rarely bet Titans games. But for whatever reason, I bet the Ravens in that game. And then my cousin, I bet it before I flew over there because I didn't really know if I was going to go to any like the little betting windows, betting shops they have over there. We get over there and my cousin goes to one of the little betting windows. There's a William Hill betting shop right next to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. He goes in there, puts a much more significant bet than what I usually bet. I'm betting peanuts compared to what he bet. Titans money line. And he came in and showed me his betting ticket. I went, ooh, I'm on Ravens -3.5. He got so pissed off at me. He didn't talk to me for like half the game because he was so mad at me about that I would dare bet against the Titans. And I did feel bad about it because I was like, I'd never bet against the Titans. I never bet Titans games. And like one of the few times I did, I'm going head to head with my cousin when he's got a lot more money on it than I did. And my bet cashed, his bet didn't. So, unfortunate in that one. All right, let's wrap up our NFL talk before we wrap up with the Nashville SC thing. I'm going to do the thing I've been doing on some of these live streams. I've got my updated power rankings. I've not updated this based on last night's game. This is only based on through Monday night's game. Haven't changed anything based on the result of the Ravens Bengals game last night. Obviously, the Bengals will probably drop now that they've lost Joe Burrow. But here's what I've got for post Monday Night Football. Let's start at the top. I've started at the bottom last few times. Let's start at the top. Eagles, I've got the Eagles number 1, got Chiefs number 2. They're playing Monday night. That might be the game of the year. Can't wait for that one. Browns, I've got 3, but it's going to be hard for them to maintain that now because Deshaun Watson's out for the season, but their defense was so good. They were kind of getting by without him. Been a lot of talk. They might try to pull like a quarterback off the street, like a Joe Flacco, Matt Ryan, one of those types, So if they can find something there, just anybody to like patch together their offense, they could keep it going because that defense is just unbelievable. Ravens, I've got number 4. They will probably be much higher next week. 5, I've got 49ers. They've sort of started to put it back together after their kind of little lull. Lions at 6. Bengals at 7. Once again, they're probably going to be dropping like a fly, or dropping like a fly, like a rock, sinking like a stone in the sea. Sinking like a stone in the sea. That's brand new. Cowboys at 8. Texans at 9. I mean, CJ Stroud. I think more than anything, we need Will Levis to be a success at the Titans, because we wanted CJ Stroud. The Titans were behind the scenes trying to maneuver a way to get up higher in the draft to draft CJ Stroud. That's a pretty well-known, accepted fact at this point in time. And it leaked out, and the Texans knew about it, so the Texans did everything they could to make sure we couldn't get in front of them. They got CJ Stroud. So if Will Levis hits and he's good and he carries us for the next, 15 years, great, move on, won't really worry about it. But if he's mediocre, if he's a bust, and then we have to watch CJ Stroud just be like the best quarterback in the league, that's going to suck. But I've got them at 9 right now. Dolphins, I've got at 10. They probably should be higher, but they've just been in a weird spot the last few weeks. Jags, I've got at 11. Seahawks, 12. Bills dropped all the way down to 13. Bucks, I've got at 14. Rams, 15. Steelers, 16. Chargers, 17. Vikings, 18. Shout out Josh Jacobs. He's been awesome. Raiders up to 19th. Broncos up to 20th. Those two are like in the bottom 4 for like my whole rankings. And then the last 2 weeks, like they've just jumped up. Broncos, like sneaky, have been kind of good for the last 3 or 4 weeks. It's going to be interesting. They might have a shot at getting in the playoffs even, especially with everything else falling apart all over the rest of the AFC. Commanders at 21st, Jets 22nd, Colts 23rd, Saints 24th, Titans 25th, Packers 26, Cardinals 27, Falcons 28, Bears. I think this is the first time I've read out the power ranking where the Bears haven't been dead last. I've got them up to 29th, Patriots at 30th, Panthers 31st, and sadly, my family, my hometown by marriage, New York, the Giants, I've got them dead last at 32nd. Sorry to all my New York brethren. We're still family. I'm still one of you, but the Giants suck. All right, let's go through the picks. I'm going to give you my unofficial picks for the full slate for this weekend. I don't even remember the last time I did this, but I was getting pretty consistently like 6-5, 7-5 most weeks. So, that's kind of where you feel successful with betting. So go through this pick by pick. Now, these aren't necessarily, as I always say this, these aren't necessarily bets that I'm actually making. I'm just going to say what I would bet if I was going to make a bet on each game. Disclaimer. Also, I'm an idiot. Don't follow my picks. Cowboys, Panthers. Cowboys minus 10.5. Would love this if it was 10. If it was 10, I would just like put the house on it. 10.5, I don't know why 10.5 feels a little bit scarier. Like these hooks sometimes just like terrify you for whatever reason, but still think if all things go according to plan, this is a game the Cowboys should win comfortably. But this does have like weird like vibes of like that Panthers game earlier in the season where you just thought the Cowboys were going to smoke them and they went out and pooped the bed and lost. They have one of those about every 6 weeks. Panthers are so bad, I don't think this is going to be this game, though. So I'm going to go Cowboys 10.5. Bears, Lions. Bears have been looking better. They're getting Justin Fields back, but the Bears looking better is still one of the worst teams in the league. 7.5, once again, feels like a kind of big number, but Lions offense has been on fire. Bears defense not very good. I'd go Lions minus 7.5 there. Raiders, Dolphins. Dolphins 13.5 point favorites. I mean, we've seen the Raiders kind of come back to life since they fired Josh McDaniels. Like, what a burden that guy was apparently on that team. What a toxic environment he was creating. Still don't think they're very good. But the Dolphins have kind of been up and down. I don't know that they're, going to smoke the Raiders here. 13.5 feels high. I'll take the Raiders and the points in that one. I think the Dolphins probably win the game. But I'd say it being more like a 7-10 point win than a, 14-point win. Titans, Jaguars. I already said this is probably like 24-14 Jaguars. Titans are, +7. Think they lose by 10 easy. Jaguars -7 is the pick there. Cardinals, Texans. Texans 6-point favorite. I don't know why that line's not bigger. I don't know if Vegas just hasn't fully bought into the Texans yet. I don't know if they're expecting there to be a regression at some point in time. I don't know if they just like that the Cardinals have maintained being kind of frisky throughout the season. I think the Texans kill them. So I'm going to go Texans -6. That feels like easy money, which means it's probably a bad bet. Giants +8.5. Commanders -8.5. Giants, I mean, they're just dead. They're dead in the water. Commanders aren't that good either, but Commanders minus 8.5. They probably win that game by 14 at least. Steelers, Browns. Browns 1.5 point favorite here. A little bit surprising with Deshaun Watson out, and they're going back to DTR over PJ Walker as their starting quarterback, who he was not good at all when they tried to go with him as the starter earlier this season. Pittsburgh's humming along, just kind of like quietly being not good at all, but somehow being 6-3. It's hard to see Kenny Pickett putting up any points against that Browns defense, but it's hard to see the Browns put up any points. This is crazy. Like the over-under is 33. See that game being like 17-10. So that might be the bet is the under, even though it's pretty low, but that might be the play. But if I got to go with somebody on the spread, we'll go. At Cleveland, so I'll give Cleveland the benefit of the doubt for that reason. We'll go Cleveland 1.5. Packers, Chargers. Packers stink. Chargers are the dumbest team in the league because they should be so much better, but their dumb coach screws up everything they try to do. Them being road favorites, like I can't trust them to beat on the road, but they should win this game comfortably, so I'll go with it, but I hate it. Chargers -3. Bucks 49ers. 49ers 12-point favorite. Bucks +12. Does feel like 49ers got their mojo back a little bit. They've kind of got healthy again now, so I'll go, I was pretty high on the Bucks early in the season, but they've kind of slipped a little bit in my vision, although they just, dominated the Titans. Like should have won that game like 35-10, but Mike Evans dropped like 20 passes. But 49ers at San Francisco, home team, they win pretty comfortably, I think, so I'll take them in the point, -12. Jets, Bills. Bills -7. Looks like the Jets have squeezed every bit of what they could get out of the team with no Aaron Rodgers. Looks like they've hit their wall, but the Bills are in shambles. And the Jets have kind of always had Josh Allen's number. I'm going to take the Jets here. Jets +7. Still think the Bills probably should win that game, but I could see them just like stumbling all over themselves, having all kinds of trouble, and only winning like 17-14 or something like that, or 24-17. So, which that would be a push. But I'm still going Jets +7. Seahawks, Rams. Rams +1 at home. Seahawks. That game sucks. Ugh. I'll go Seahawks -1. It's basically a pick 'em. I'll take the Seahawks. Vikings, Broncos. This is a weird one because, like I said, the Broncos have sneaky started to look good. Vikings obviously have found like a little bit of life with Josh Dobbs, a little shot in the arm. But I mean, we saw with Arizona, like he gave them a shot in the arm for about 2 weeks, and then everything came back down to earth for him there. At Denver, the defense is playing better for Denver, but the Vikings defense is playing pretty good. I don't like trusting the Broncos because I feel like there's just the Russell Wilson. He's been better, but he's just was still. I'll go Broncos -2. Blah. In the big game, Eagles, Chiefs, the Taylor Swift Bowl. She's there to meet the family. What a soap opera this whole thing's turned into. But the game itself should be awesome. Super Bowl rematch. Two of the top 4 or 5 teams in the league this season going head to head. First good primetime game we've had in I don't know how long. Can't wait to watch this one. Should be awesome. I think the Eagles are the best team in football. I think, they've just got everything clicking. Everything's going well for them. The Chiefs still, like, they're the Chiefs. They're always going to be competitive. Mahomes, when you have Mahomes, you're always going to be in every game. And they're starting to figure out some things with their passing game, some things with their defense they were struggling with early in the season. But I like the Eagles here. I'm taking the Eagles +3. So that is all of our picks for the NFL weekend. I'm going to wrap that up, get into the last thing we want to talk about today. Sadly, the bummer. Somehow it's even bigger bummer than talking about the Titans. Nashville SC, the 2023 season officially came to an end. It's been over a week now. Lost the 2 games in the 3-game series to the Orlando City. MLS playoffs are just so stupid. The fact that now we have this 3-game series and now we've got like a 2-week break because of the international break. So dumb. So dumb. All right, so I think for the first time in our MLS history, I would consider this Nashville SC season to be a failure. Obviously the main goal is always to win a championship. So, there's people that will say every season hasn't been a success, that it's been a failure because we haven't won a championship, because we didn't achieve the level we should have. And I don't know, because we're an expansion team, because we're a new team, because like so many of our players, not marquee players, not superstars, not really, people expected much out of until they came here. I think going to the playoffs 3 straight years, being one of the higher seeds for the first 3 years in the playoffs, was a huge achievement for like an expansion team. Having the league MVP last year, that's, huge. But this year, just, had a nice little run early in the season, like a 9 or 10 game unbeaten streak, then struggled kind of down the next little wave before we went to Leagues Cup. Then obviously Leagues Cup wasn't what it was. I think people kind of remember and like kind of say we caught fire in Leagues Cup, but we didn't really. Like we won like what, 2-3 games on penalties, and like the other ones were like 1-0, 2-1 games. It wasn't like we were just smoking teams on the way to the final. But it was the best form we had because we were playing well. We were keeping teams in front of us. We were keeping teams intact. We were scoring goals ourselves. Post Leagues Cup, just the wheels completely came off. We never were able to get things going again. Sam Surridge, the big designated player striker that we signed from Nottingham Forest, flashed a couple times, but then he had an injury right after the Leagues Cup that I think slowed his integration, hurt his integration, and he never really fully found his legs here this season. So certainly something to look forward to for next season is him having a full off season, a full preseason, a full opportunity to prepare and be with the team to get ready for next season. That's something to certainly look forward to, something to be encouraged by. But I don't know. It felt like to me, there's a lot of people who are critical, and this is where I was going to get into Jeff Fisher kind of comparisons, because a lot of people, and it's the same people who've been critical of Gary Smith every single season, are very critical of Gary Smith. It seems like they've really just amped it up to 11 after this season, and I don't see it, man. Like I would it be awesome if we were just like an incredible attacking team that scored like 7 goals a game? It was just like old Real Madrid Galacticos just flying over the field. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be great. But I mean, you can blame Gary for playing a little bit more of a defensive thing. We certainly don't park the bus. That's the most frustrating thing, is people are like, oh, here we go with Gary Ball. What everybody thinks is Gary Ball is what Orlando did to us in 2 games. Nick an early goal and then just sit on the game and not let anything happen. Just destroy the game. Play just anti-negative crap football. That's what Orlando did for 2 games. And everybody's like, Gary Ball, Gary Ball, Gary Ball. And then we lose to a team that does that crap. So Gary likes a good defensive structure. And I really think some of this issues, the Gary Ball, the park the bus stuff, goes back to Mourinho. Because Mourinho, like, in his days in Chelsea, nobody talked about Mourinho parking the bus. Nobody was like, oh, he plays too much defense. He was winning all the championships. He was doing everything. Everything was fine. Then he goes to, Inter, and suddenly it's like, oh, he just plays anti-football. He parks the bus. He comes to United. Everybody says the same thing. And I'm like, I don't know that just like trying to play sound, good structural defense, keeping your shape, is parking the bus. You want to see parking the bus, and this is another thing I probably just goes against the coaches that I have a little bit better feeling for. You want to see what parking the bus is, go back and watch the U.S. men's national team game that they played last night against Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago sat 11 players and then eventually 10 players when they went down to man inside their own box for the whole game. They just never left their box. Like, it had to have been like 90% of the game was in our attacking third. And everybody's like, oh, typical Greg Berhalter soccer. Took 80 minutes to score against an inferior opponent. Well, that inferior opponent just like left 10 people, 11 people in the box, and we're just not going to let us get a clean shot. We're not going to let us get a clean cross. Not going to let us have a clean look at goal. I mean, if one team just sets out to do nothing but defend, the best attacking teams in the world are going to struggle to break that down. So side tangent. That's parking the bus. What Gary Smith does is not parking the bus. And I just think when you talk about the lack of attacking football, should he play more attacking strategy? It's like, I mean, look at the squad. Who was the players that he should have put in to create a more attack-based thing? Because he played the most attacking players he could have. Maybe he could have come up with a lineup to get Schaffelberg, Fafa, Hani, and Sam all out there. That was kind of maybe the one argument you could make, was that he always kind of went either Fafa or Schaffelberg, never really played them together. So that's the one kind of argument you could really make. But I just think the talent just wasn't there to really play a full flowing attacking style football, particularly because Leal, probably the second best creative player you've got, basically missed the whole season, or at least more than half the season. I mean, when you've got, Godoy, he's limited in what he can do now. Sean Davis just went off a cliff this season. He was not bad, but he was just the most average, nothing happening midfielder you've ever seen. Brian Anunga, he can't do anything. Dax, that little stretch in the League's Cup, and then the little stretch right before that in the season, he kind of had a little bit of a renaissance and was back to playing good football, which, that's the root of the problem right there, is like when your main control player, your main creative source in your midfield is a 36-year-old guy who can barely run. That's a huge problem right there. And to me, that's the biggest thing that they've got to address this offseason. It's got to be getting younger, got to be getting more creative in the midfield, because, Hani can't do it all. He can't be the creator and the goal scorer and everything else. You got to have somebody else in there that's setting up things for him, setting up things for Schaffelberg, setting up things for Fafa, setting up things for Sam, setting up things for others. And we just did not have that in midfield. And, I think that's why Gary got stuck in playing the diamond midfield for the whole season, because he didn't feel like he had a complete enough midfield to play anything else. So he just put extra bodies in there to clog it up. It helped Dax to not have to run as much when there was 3 other central midfielders around doing the running for him. But got to get younger, got to get better there. But the thing, and I'm going to say this, Nashville SC fans that are watching this, you got to prepare yourself for. You're going to want us to go out and sign like a marquee, major upgraded central midfielder. I certainly want us to do that too. Unless it's a trade or a free agent signing from another team in MLS, it's probably, unfortunately, not going to happen in the offseason. It's not going to happen until next summer. And we've seen that pattern. That's just the pattern. If you want to go get somebody from Europe, if you want to go get somebody from Liga MX, if you want to go get somebody from one of these teams that run the opposite schedule calendar to what MLS does, you're not going to be able to get those players in like the January window, because that's the middle of those league seasons. Like, European teams aren't, unless it's just a complete player they hate and don't want, they're not giving up players in January. Like we saw it with, Shaq. We wanted Shaq in the summer when we traded Alistair Johnson. Getafe, I believe, is where he was at. They weren't willing to give him up in the summer, or weren't willing to give him up in January. Waited till summer, got him then. Same thing happened with Akiloba. Wanted to get him in the winter. Couldn't get him away from Liga MX team that he was at the time. Summer comes, they're free to let him go. Similar to Sam Surridge. I'm sure Sam Surridge was on the list of strikers that they potentially wanted to bring in this past winter. But Forest weren't going to let him go in the middle of the season. He probably wasn't wanting to leave yet because, he's a British guy. His first taste of the Premier League playing this season probably wasn't something he wanted to bail on, halfway through the season. He wanted to see the season out, I'm sure, too. So, But if we're wanting a big marquee, especially European-based player to come over and fix the midfield, I think we have to start now preparing ourselves that it's just not feasible for that to happen in the winter window. We're going to have to do the same cycle over again where the guy comes in July, probably doesn't get fully settled at any point into the second half of the season, and it ends up feeling like a little bit of a waste. But that's just it's not really the front office's fault. Everybody's blaming Mike Jacobs for all this stuff. Everybody's like DC United just hired our assistant general manager as their new general manager, and I saw somebody tweet out like, come get Mike Jacobs next. And I'm like, do you realize Mike Jacobs built this roster that has made 4 straight playoffs like out of nothing, like scraps? He put this team together from scraps. Like nobody thought, like, look at what happened to Cincinnati's initial build. Look at what happened to Minnesota's initial roster build. Look at what other expansion teams have done, how so many other look at Miami until they got messy. And suddenly, like, people are like, oh, Mike Jacobs is an idiot that doesn't know what he's doing. We got to get rid of Mike Jacobs. We got to get rid of the front office. I don't know where it comes from. Like, I know you want to win championships. We all want to win our team to win a championship, but it's just like all or nothing expectation that teams come from. I don't know if it's because, like, we got a lot of UT fans here where, like, the expectation is all or nothing every year for UT. Like, they're already starting to turn on Josh Heupel after last year. He was, like, knighted the saint of Knoxville. Now, like, after a bad loss to Missouri, people are like, oh, this Heupel guy, we should have known that he didn't have anything and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I don't know if it's because, like, people are also, like, the people who are come from soccer, European soccer fandom, like, it's so much easier in European soccer to, like, see your team's doing something wrong, knowing how to address it, knowing how to fix it. It's so much easier. Like, people who are like Manchester City fans or Manchester United fans or Liverpool fans or Chelsea fans, those teams, they need a midfielder. Most of the time, they just go get it. They need a striker. Most of the time, so they just go get it. Doesn't always work out. Those players don't always turn out to be good, but it's a lot easier process when you don't have a salary cap, when you don't have GAM, when you don't have TAM, when you're on the same calendar as the leagues that you're trying to go get players from. I think, like I said, I think the biggest hindrance on Nashville SC's roster moves the last few years has been that the MLS calendar is opposite the rest of the world. So our preseason transfer window is right in the middle of other leagues' seasons. So they're not as willing to give up players during that period as they are in the summer, which is in the middle of our season. So it kind of restricts things, makes things difficult. And I don't know. I think people don't take that for granted. I think people look at like the way soccer works in Europe or the way the NFL works, where teams can just go draft or sign free agents that they need to, and the salary cap, doesn't seem to exist, and just think, well, why can't Nashville SC do all that? It's like there's a lot of extenuating circumstances that kind of make it a very big challenge to build these rosters, which makes it all the more impressive that we put together a roster that has made the playoffs in each season in the team's existence. Should it have done a little bit better in that time? Probably. There's been a couple years, especially like, 2 years ago, where we probably should have made a deeper run, probably should have done a lot better and just didn't hit our stride, didn't get things right when we needed to. But I mean, do you blow it up and just throw everything out because you haven't quite gotten to the top level yet? No. And this is where I go back to Jeff Fisher. I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about Jeff Fisher and the comparison there. Everybody goes back to like, oh, it's 8/8, August 8th. It's Jeff Fisher Day. Ho, 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 Jeff Fisher, always 500, always 500. And it's like, well, we went to a Super Bowl. We had like multiple like 13-3 high-level seasons under Jeff Fisher. We were never completely awful under Jeff Fisher. And then people just got tired of it. People just said, we haven't gotten over the hump, and we might never have with Jeff Fisher. There, very real possibility that we were never going to win a Super Bowl under Jeff Fisher. People got tired of him. People got sick of just being like, decent to mediocre to really good every once in a while, and just got fed up with it and just wanted change for change's sake. And went to Mike Munchak, which was a disaster. Went to Ken Wisenham, which is even bigger disaster. So I just another NFL example. These aren't exactly like for like comparisons, but I mean, look at like Andy Reid. Pretty successful in Philadelphia, never could quite get over the hump and win a Super Bowl there. They eventually just decide time has come. We need a change. They move on. He moves on. He goes to Kansas City. Now, getting Patrick Mahomes certainly helped that, but he was always competitive, always had him right there in the hunt from the time he got to Kansas City. Getting Patrick Mahomes put it over the hump. But now he looks like he might be a top 5 coach in NFL history, and Philadelphia just let him go because it took a little bit longer than they wanted for him to get a championship. Now, I'm not saying Gary Smith is Andy Reid. I'm not saying Gary Smith is like anywhere close to that level, but I think the other thing that kind of gets forgotten about, that kind of gets pushed under the rug sometimes with Gary Smith, is he's won an MLS Cup. There's only a handful of active managers that can say that, and he's one of them. So I don't know that I'd be that quick to push him out. And there's some similar stuff going on where some people are starting to get a little act like Vrabel should be on the hot seat and stuff like this. And my general rule of thumb is with a coach, if you fire your coach and multiple teams are going to be lined up to hire him, you might have made a mistake in firing that coach. If it's like right away, so somebody's will take a couple of years off, will recycle, come back. But I mean, like, if you think somebody wouldn't hire Gary Smith if Nashville SC fired him, you're crazy. I mean, Portland just hired Phil Neville, who was a disaster in Miami. I mean, Chris Armish just got a job, and he's been a crap coach everywhere he's been. So if you think somebody wouldn't say, hey, this guy who took an expansion team to the playoffs each of the 4 years, who, coached up and got good performances out of Hani Mukhtar to turn him, not saying he turned Hani Mukhtar into an MVP, but people look at that and say, this guy had the MVP. He got this guy from, Switzerland or wherever Hani was playing and, got a lot out of him. Other franchises will look at the success Gary had here and say, look how good he did in Nashville. He's got an MLS Cup under his belt. He's a guy we'll give a shot to. Same thing for Vrabel. If the Titans fired Vrabel, there'd be 10 teams that'd be lined up to hire him. So Gary Smith, maybe not 10 teams, but I guarantee you, DC United, do you think they wouldn't take Gary Smith? Yeah, they would take Gary Smith in a heartbeat. So that's kind of my general rule of thumb, is if other teams would want your coach, probably shouldn't fire him. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too much of a defender. Maybe I'm just too much of a, homebody. It's one of been my biggest pet peeves of the post Sir Alex Ferguson era of Manchester United, as we've, sadly fallen into the same pattern that every other club in Europe had been in for years, where it's, manager basically has a year and a half, 2 years tops, and then you fire him and go on if he hasn't won you a championship, like Ten Hag last year, Carabao Cup, FA Cup final, deep run in Europa League, finishes third in Premier League. This year struggles. Nobody seems to be mentioning the fact that like half the team's out injured, but he's struggling, and like suddenly he's on the hot seat. I hate this crap. I'm just like, let's like let these managers like work it through it. Like, especially when you look at like MLS, because like MLS isn't like the other leagues where, you just win by having a good season. The playoffs, you get hot at the right time, anything can happen. Like Orlando was terrible the first half of the season. They just caught fire the second half of the season, and now they're one of the better teams in the playoffs. So I think if you can be consistent and be in the mix, that's all you really need in MLS, and you just got to catch fire at the right time. And Gary Smith is a coach who is consistent is his middle name. So I don't know. I'm not anti-Gary. I think we should stick with him. I definitely think anybody who thinks we should get rid of Mike Jacobs is insane. Like that's Gary. I can see that a little bit. I can kind of understand people who are Gary out, but anybody that's calling for Mike Jacobs' job, you were an idiot. I'm just sorry. That's maybe too mean, but I really think you just look at, once again, look at Cincinnati. Look at how much of a disaster they were trying to put their franchise together, and look at what we've done. Granted, they've now surpassed us, but that's just because they finally got it right. I don't know. Rambling a little bit at this point in time. I think I've said my piece as much as I can. Obviously, I think the big improvement has to be central midfielder. And like I said, I don't know. That's one of the things that's hard about being an MLS fan that I've learned over the last couple of years is with the weird roster mechanics, with the salary cap, the GAM, the TAM, the designated players, stuff like that. It's like hard to really understand what moves your team can make. Like I said, I think we need to go get a high level, younger center midfielder, but I don't think that's likely to happen in the offseason just because a player like that probably has to come from Europe and probably wouldn't be available in like the January window because the team in Europe's not going to want to give up a top level player in the middle of their season. So, but I don't know. And we could see big changes. There's talk with the way Messi came in that there'll be with the expansion of the CONCACAF Champions League, that there could be big changes coming to the MLS salary structure, an increase in the salary cap, additional designated players being allowed, things like that. So it's kind of hard to predict what's going to happen when we don't even know what the roster build structure and rules are going to look like. But I'm not doom and gloom. Oh my God, this is so terrible. We got to fire everybody and reset the whole thing. I think we definitely need, roster wise, the most changes we've probably ever seen. We've had a pretty consistent team, maybe one or two players in and out every season so far, but this might be the offseason where we need a little bit more of an overhaul, a little bit more of a changeover, but I don't see it. I was going through Speedway Soccer, I believe, had one of their writers who did an article where he went through the full roster, predicted what decision we made with each roster spot. And they went through it and they said basically so much of the current squad is under roster control that the likelihood is that, with the exception of like some of the fringe players like Luke Hawkinson and some of those others like that, just about everybody would be back. The one kind of, and understandably, I understand why this was, they said Chance Fafako comes back, but he's going to be a free agent. He will likely want to test free agency because at his age, he's likely got to get the best contract he can. Would he love to stay in Nashville? Probably. Would Nashville love to have him back? Yes. Are we going to give him the biggest offer that he's going to get? I don't know. And I think he's probably, it makes sense that he would want the biggest offer he can get at this point in his career. But yeah, because I think Richard said a little bit earlier, he asked, has Nashville announced their end of season roster moves yet? And no, they haven't. But I think that's largely because, like I said, based on what I read in that article about the predictions of what we do with the roster, we're not likely to make any significant roster moves in terms of like the basic of like picking up options. Everybody that we have is kind of already under contract through future seasons, with the exception of like Fafa and a few others that are kind of minor players. Like the bigger stuff will probably come later in the offseason for us. Like, do we try to find a trade partner for Randall Leal? Because he's got too big of a salary to play less than half the game. So do they try to get him off the books by trading him to somebody else in the league? Maybe that happens. Dax is out of contract, but he might retire. So that'll be, he's got to decide what he wants to do first, and the team will decide what to do in terms of that. But there's just, in terms of the current core team, there's not really any significant moves that'll be kind of made, I think, in this first window. So there's a lot of people that are kind of been like, oh, no, I can't believe Nashville SC still hasn't announced their roster moves yet. And I think it's just because there's nothing really significant that's going to change. There's no real rush to do it or get it out there. Whereas like, a team like Galaxy cut their whole team basically because they're basically blowing it up and starting from scratch because they've hit rock bottom. So I don't think Nashville SC is in that boat. So I don't think they're in a rush to make roster decisions yet, just because there's no reason to rush to it because there's not that many that they have to decide on because most of the team is under contract going into next year. There's only a handful of players where there's like an option year or players that'll be a free agent like Dax and Fafa or things like that. So let's see. I'm going to catch up on the chat and we'll kind of wrap up for this one. Hunter says, from where I'm sitting, we were challenging for the Supporter Shield. Then we won like 3 games in MLS from July on. That's inexcusable from the coach, in my opinion. I agree. The form in the second half of the season, definitely you like to see your coach get a little bit more out of the team. But at the same time, like it's kind of like I said, I got to point the finger at the roster a little bit because Sam never really hit the ground running. Walker Zimmerman was, Gary alluded to in his press conference, basically hurt the whole season. So even when he was out, when he was in, he was still playing through an injury, and it was an Achilles injury, which can't be easy to play through. But I mean, the manager has to take some blame, certainly. Like, it's there's no doubt about that. But it's not, to me, it's not fire the manager level, take the blame. It's just, see what went wrong, analyze it, learn from it, see if we can go out and correct it, next season and get back to where we should have been. So, Gary definitely has to take some blame. I don't want to come out here like I'm saying like, oh, Gary's the best manager in MLS. Why are we all going after Gary? There's no doubt he gets some blame for this. You don't have that kind of just full on collapse feels too strong, but just that full on dip that was Cup. You can't have that type of form and not put at least some of the blame on the coach. So he's got to take his share of the blame. No doubt about that. But I do feel like the lack of creative spark beyond Hani, and we've known that for a while, and we hoped Sam would fix it, but I think him coming in late, then getting injured, didn't do him any favors. And the fact that we didn't really have anybody to set him and Hani up, also was a big issue. Is even when Sam had some good showings, there's just not enough supply coming from the rest of the team. So those are my thoughts. Any Manchester United comments? I kind of alluded to it a little bit. There's so many injuries. I mean, like the whole, back four has basically been out for the whole season. Luke Shaw, Wan-Bissaka, Varane's been in and out. He's made of glass these days. Martinez, who really seems to be the linchpin, the key to the whole defense, he's been out the whole season. Casemiro's just legs are gone. Like everything it's just like the second time this has happened in recent memory for Manchester United where we've brought in a Six, a CDM, and they've come in, hit the ground running, looked like a player that was going to completely change us. And then 8 months in, their legs just gave out and just never could get the form back. And before it was Nemanja Matic. Like when he first came in, I was like, this is the dude. This is the guy we needed for this whole time. His legs gave out pretty quickly, and now it looks like Casemiro's have gone that way. A lot of talk that, United may be looking to get some of that Saudi money to move Varane and Casemiro out to kind of fund some moves with Jim Ratcliffe potentially coming in and taking over the operations of football. There's a lot to be said about, did we want like full ownership takeover from the Glazers? Yes. But him coming in, taking 25% stake and taking over the actual football operations, step in the right direction, but probably in the pudding when things start to actually happen there. Really wish we hadn't spent the $80 million on Casemiro now. It looked like it was a great move at the time, but it's, fell apart pretty quickly. Kind of wish we maybe had gone and gotten like a Declan Rice type player. Cause I mean, what did he go for? Like 140? Like not that much more than Casemiro. And I'd much rather have Declan Rice than Casemiro right now, but is what it is on that one. But yeah, they put together a few wins. I mean, the attack's coming together. You're like trying to get a new striker broken in. You're trying to get a lot of new players kind of broken in. The lack of stability with the issues in defense, I think, are a bigger problem than they should have been. The Mason Mount signing, like, it's just bizarre now because he's not even playing anymore. I don't even know what position he would play if he was coming into the team because he hasn't been able to play as an 8. He's not going to play over Bruno as a 10. I guess he could play some wing. He's played on the wing for Chelsea some, so maybe you throw him out on the right because Anthony's not playing really well right now either, but I don't know. They're struggling, but they put together a few wins. They've gotten a little bit of momentum, also seem to be a little snake bit. Like that Copenhagen game, you talk about snake bit, you talk about bad luck, you talk about everything being stacked against you. That's a game they would have cruised to like a 5-0 win if Marcus Rashford doesn't get a red card for stepping on a guy's foot. Yeah, but it was a good time for the international break. I needed a break from United. Last comment we've got right now. I think the most frustrating thing for fans is that nothing has really changed and our season-by-season performance is getting worse. Yeah, I kind of alluded to that too. It seems like I think one of the things with the roster build was it was more successful than I probably thought it was going to be. I don't, necessarily think they, had planned for the team to be as good as it ended up being. And when they had that success early, they kind of probably were a little bit too conservative in saying, well, let's just keep the band together. This is working. Let's keep trying this. Let's keep trying this, when they probably should have been a little bit more, aggressive in supplementing the team. Instead of one big signing a year or like one little minor signing a year, probably should have done a little bit more recycling of the roster, like 3 or 4 players in, 3 or 4 players out, instead of like 1 or 2 each season. Missing on Ake Loba, that was a huge setback. The John Cadiz kind of being a little bit of a miss also probably didn't help. So that's a really good spot on point, is that it has kind of been the same. We haven't really, we were hoping Sam gets there. It's kind of like he's kind of the first big significant signing we've had that, has looked promising, has looked like it can do something, but there needs to be more. And I kind of was alluding to that earlier, where I think this has to be the offseason where, instead of Dave Romney leaves, McNaughton comes in, which that didn't even happen until during the season. Like Nick DePie came in. Nick DePie was supposed to be the guy who replaced Romney, but he apparently showed up with a bum Achilles out of the gate. So I'd like to see, I don't really necessarily might needs to go out. Like I think Leal, maybe just because you got to get that money off the books, like for the level of performance, the level of availability he's had. Dax, would love to have Dax back, but at the same time, if you can get younger and better there, that'd be a huge help. If Fafa goes out somewhere in free agency, then obviously you need another winger, another speedy attacking player. Most indications seem to be Teal. Bunbury will be back, and that's fine if he's like a second choice, third choice striker coming off the bench. I think he's perfectly fine in that role. Anunga, I think he's under contract and will be back, but I wouldn't necessarily bring him back. Yeah, I would definitely want to see like 4 or 5 players out and 4 or 5 new players in. Just if nothing else, refresh the team, get a little bit of spark, because sometimes that changes a lot. Even if it's letting 5 players go and bringing in 5 players who are about the same talent level, just that new energy, that new freshness can spark a team. And even if you bring in like 3 or 4 new players who maybe aren't necessarily starters, it pushes the existing starters more because they feel there's more competition, there's more challenge. And to Hunter's point, there's probably a degree to which, the starters who were the starters knew they were starters. There wasn't as much competition in the team, which could be a systemic issue with MLS's roster structure. Because, it's not like there's a whole lot of teams in MLS that have some great depth and there's like 2 players at every position at any other squad. That's not a national exclusive thing, but, get some fresh legs in, some fresh bodies in, even if they're not meant to come in to be starters, just people that can come in and push the existing players, make them fight for their spots a little bit more, make them fight a little bit harder. I could see that. I could see that being a huge improvement to Hunter's point there. So yeah, I would agree there. Need some changes just to kind of spark something and, give us a little bit of new energy. All right. With that, we're going to wrap up for Friday night. I appreciate everybody who jumped in the chat. Appreciate everybody who watched. We'll be back with more content coming to the channel as always. So stay tuned. If you've not done so already, please subscribe and turn the bell on for notifications so you never miss any updates as they come. We'll be back tomorrow with Catterday. And until then, enjoy your life.